The next speaker is Karen Fifield on the future of threatened species in captivity and the role of zoos in conservation. And we talked of, so I think John Innes talked of some of the frustrations in working with DOC on translocations. Generally, frustrations of working with DOC, Karen was very quickly on my ear and on the phone and reminding me how slow DOC was at making decisions. Karen, we have certainly taken your concerns on, and we're aiming to get a lot more speed in how we do things with you. We acknowledge the role that the zoos play as the botanic gardens in the work we're doing on threatened species, and the very important agreement we signed with the zoos of New Zealand for the role that they play. Karen is an integral part of the kakapo program. When we have sick kakapo or takahi, they go to Wellington Zoo, and we know you put an awful lot of money into the tank. Just as Ngāi Tahu's putting in 1.2 million, you're also putting an awful lot to help us save threatened species. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Fifield.
Thank you, Lou. I've never been known for not having an opinion about something. Since 1970, we've experienced 60% decline in species across the globe. So as we've heard people talking today, there's actually no option anymore to do nothing. We really have to do something. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what zoos and aquariums and wildlife parks are doing within New Zealand, but also globally. So who are we? In New Zealand, there are 25 members of the Zoo and Aquarium Association, Australasia, and of those 25 members, they are all animal welfare accredited. And so there are some wildlife parks and zoos and aquariums in the country who are not members of ZAR, but we don't actually talk about them. What I'm talking about today is actually our organisations that are actually accredited through animal welfare and do a lot of work for species conservation. Zoos around the world see 750 million people. That's a huge critical mass of people. In New Zealand, we see 2.13 million visitors across New Zealand. And we employ a lot of people, and half of the people we employ are actually in animal care and science. We see a lot of schools, and I was very taken by Kara's presentation. We do a brilliant program called Zoofari with the warehouse supports. This is, again, about business actually helping to do this sort of work. And we bring disadvantaged schools to the 4 major zoos in the country. And some of the kids that we see haven't been to Wellington, let alone come to the zoo. So it's one of my favourite programs that we do, and it's not only the children that benefit, but their families as well, and their schools. In our organisation, across the members, where there's 100 members across Australia, New Zealand and Papua New Guinea, and we support conservation programs in 46 countries around the world. 40% of those programs are in Australia. It's nice to see Gregory here. 24% of those are in New Zealand and 36% are global. And as Lou mentioned, we signed an MOU with DOC a few years back now to sort of think about what are the things that we can do within zoos and aquariums that can actually help in terms of what we need to do around endangered species. The World Association of Zoos and Aquariums also developed a world conservation strategy for zoos and aquariums that was launched a couple of years ago. It's the 4th one we've done over the years. It's quite a phenomenal document, so you can always go to the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums website and it's downloadable, and you can actually have a look at what the world body is saying is best practice for zoos and aquariums across the planet. So as I said, we employ a lot of people, but the areas that really are specific around our threatened species work is really around these ones: advocacy, breeding and husbandry expertise, animal welfare science, and so on. Zoos around the world are the 3rd highest contributor to funding for field conservation. How many of you knew that? No, because we never talk about it. We're too busy getting on with it, and Nature Conservancy is number 1, WWF Global is 2, and zoos and aquariums around the world are the 3rd. highest contributor to field conservation across the planet. And we do that through funding, but also through in-kind support through our staff actually going out and supporting field conservation. And a lot of zoos around the world actually contribute to New Zealand species conservation, not just the ones in New Zealand. So, for example, Toledo Zoo actually supports Kiwi for Kiwi, Cincinnati Zoo supports Kia Conservation Trust, and the National Zoo in Washington, which is linked to the Smithsonian, they do a lot of work with Kiwi. In terms of advocacy, we actually approach our advocacy work using the IUCN Love Not Loss approach. We believe that people need to love animals, love plants, love the environment, especially in an urban, disconnected and confused world. So if we can get people to love before they understand the loss, then they'll be way more inclined to do the work that I've been hearing you all talk about today. That is really the thing that we can do the best for you. If we get over 2 million visitors, we need to work together to find out what are those messages we want people to understand. How do we get people to connect, understand, and then act? That's the process we use across this region. Connect, understand, act. And there's a lot of examples across the country of our members, and actually Cara mentioned one in terms of Rainbow Springs, they're also a member. We've heard about Pukaha Mount Bruce, they're also a member. Auckland Zoo does a huge amount of work in terms of advocacy, and all of the zoos across the country really believe in this. Last year we spent nearly $30 million just on CapEx. In my zoo alone, we spent $6 million on CapEx for Meet the Locals, He Tuku Aroha, which is our love story for New Zealand. Auckland Zoo spent $16.5 million on Tuanui. So these capital investments are actually about having the animals in homes that actually tell the story really well for our visitors. And so we need to make sure that we're working with DOC and with others to actually get those messages right. Breeding for restoration and insurance populations is obviously key to what we do. And I don't like the word captive. It has awful connotations to me. I've said this to Nick before. I think it should be called conservation breeding, not captive breeding. And if you look at the conservation breeding specialist group who work closely with us across the world, they are part of the IUCN, and they have been given the remit to do all the Species Survival Commission planning work for conservation of species. They have an office in Auckland. So we probably need to be talking to people like that, as well as to the universities and all the other people mentioned today who are doing fabulous work around genetics, etc. I've listed some of the animals that we have actually been involved with breeding for restoration and holding for insurance populations. There's more on the list, but I chose these ones because obviously my favourites, the Grand and Otago skinks, the charismatic megafauna of the South Island, we love them. So obviously these animals are really under threat. We need to take them into ex situ situations so that we can work on what's happening to them in the environment and be able to do something about that. I'll mention Hogstadter's frogs. We work across the country on different frog species. So at my zoo we hold Maud Island frogs. Obviously Auckland's been doing a lot of work on Archie's frogs, and this is a photo of Hamilton Zoo with Hogstadter's frogs. So we not only do breeding, but we do a lot of field conservation work as well. I've had staff recently out with Ben Bell looking at Maud Island frogs, and this for me is about closing the loop for my people. They all work with these animals, they really want to do something about them and saving them in the field. With kaka, we've done a lot of work for North Island kaka in terms of breeding for restoration. So a lot of the birds that we bred were released into sanctuaries like Cape Kidnappers, Zealandia, other parts around the North Island. So it's really important that we continue to do breeding for restoration. But also we've been doing some veterinary studies with kaka. So in Wellington, we've been working with Zealandia and with DOC looking at lead toxicity in kaka and also in tui, actually. And it's really interesting what's going on with those birds. We have expertise in a wide range of species, Because we hold quite a number of taxa in our organisations, we do have husbandry experts across that range of taxa. The last data set that came out around our accreditation process, looking at the 5 domains of animal welfare that was developed at Massey University by Professor David Mellor for agriculture, we've applied that to our accreditation process so we can actually assess how we're caring for these animals across the 5 domains. If you don't know what that is, we talk about 4 physical domains, and a 5th domain is the affective state, so the mental and emotional health of those animals. So we cut the last data set across all of the different taxa, a few different ways we actually cut it. But what was phenomenal was that across the 4 physical domains, the work that we're doing on New Zealand native species was the best by far. So I was so pleased about that. So the expertise that we hold in our zoos is available to you, to the work that you really want to do out there. Our people love getting out in the field. They love actually seeing that the work they're doing in the zoo to breed these animals actually can be connected in some way. Wildlife veterinary medicine and rehabilitation is becoming quite a big area of focus for us. In my zoo alone, out of the nest to Kohanga, 70% of the caseload of our vets is in wildlife. 70%. And that is growing. Now, I don't think that's a badge of honour, actually, because the things we're seeing is they're indicating that there's problems out there. So we need to work together to understand what some of those trends are and to really be thinking about what's going on in the environment together. So the vets who work with us, and Auckland Zoo has fantastic veterinary hospital as well, so we really need to make sure those vets are included. Just give you some examples of the animals that we work with. Albatross, Fiordland crested penguin, kiwi of all denominations, and obviously collaboration for wildlife conservation and research is really important. So we can't do this alone, as Cara just said. None of us can do this alone. It's a very, very big task we've set ourselves. So in terms of collaborating, whether it's for advocacy or research or veterinary medicine, it's really important that we do it together. I've mentioned little Archie's frogs. And then habitat restoration is something that you probably don't think about. Most of us are located in urban environments. And a lot of times, as I mentioned before with the Zoofari kids, zoos and botanic gardens and wildlife parks may be the only experience people have in terms of nature. So urban nature is absolutely critical. So the sites of our zoos are incredibly important. So if I look at Wellington Zoo and I look at the health of that habitat across the whole zoo, we have so many native species choosing to live there. And you could say the same, you know, in a whole range of organisations. So, and the work that Auckland Zoo is doing in Rotorua Island as well. One of the things I do want to mention, just going back to the vets though, is that the vets who work in our zoos are wildlife experts. All the vets that I have employed at Wellington Zoo have all gone through the Massey Masterate for Wildlife and Zoo Medicine. That's a project we do with Massey University. It's unique in the world, so that we have these 4 residents that go through this 3-year masterate. These people are coming out and they are now actually working with you out in the field. And so for me, being partners in conservation is absolutely critical to the task we've got ahead of us. Thank you.